Hello, welcome to today's press review. Today we'll be taking a look at the rise in terrorism in Syria, as we are joined later by political expert Nidal Naisi from Damascus. We'll also take a look at what analysts are writing about Turkey and Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan. But first, as usual, let's start with papers here in the UK. The Guardian leads its front page reporting that criminal courts across England and Wales will be severely disrupted today when barristers and solicitors stage an unprecedented mass walkout in protest at government plans to slash legal aid fees by up to 30%. The paper also reports on Islamists exploiting weak border to fight in Iraq and Syria, and on Sir David King, the government's special envoy on climate change, saying that Britain needs to face up to a radical change in weather conditions and spend more on flood defences. The Independent leads its front page with an exclusive interview with Professor Sir Mike Richards, the head of the Care Quality Commission, saying that the NHS care is outstanding despite a year of inquiries into underperforming hospitals. The paper also features a picture of Eusebio da Silva Ferreira, Portugal's football legend who has passed away aged 71. The Daily Telegraph leads its front page reporting on George Osborne's blueprint for tax cuts, with the Chancellor promising permanent smaller state. The paper also reports on more than 1 in 3 hospital trusts cutting spending on patients' meals, saying that hospitals serve 69p meals to patients. And the Times leads its front page reporting that British commanders and military experts saying that hard-fought territory in southern Afghanistan will fall to the Taliban after British forces withdraw this year. The paper also reports that patients face being denied treatments for cancer and heart disease after health chiefs overspend their budgets. And now let's take a look at the top stories in the Middle East. The Syrian crisis is about to enter its 3rd year. Let's take a look now at a potential Washington rapprochement with President Assad and the rising threat of radical militants in Syria. Starting from Lebanon's Daily Star, which looks at the rising influence of Al-Qaeda militants in Syria in an article titled "Handle with Care." Developments on the ground in Syria have taken a dramatic new turn in recent years and represent an important opportunity for some self-proclaimed friends of the Syrian people. Rebels of various persuasions, from the mainstream Free Syrian Army to the conservative Islamists of the Islamic Front, have found common cause in trying to stem the influence of Al-Qaeda. And for months, countries in the West and elsewhere have been warning against the rising influence of these militants in Syria, perhaps using this as an excuse to avoid getting involved in the crisis. Now is their chance to support the rebels who openly declare that their goals have nothing to do with those of the religious extremists trying to hijack the uprising against the regime. The paper views the situation as complex, but this shouldn't be an excuse for inaction. There are many shades of grey when it comes to the opposition, but some aspects are crystal clear. The situation on ground is fluid, and the long-awaited Geneva II conference is in the horizon. Countries that have taken an interest in Syria's future must approach with care. They must ensure that current developments won't end up being just another missed opportunity. The Syria Times features an article titled "Combating Terrorism Should Be Given Top Priority at Geneva II Conference," where the anonymous editor suggests that counter-terrorism should top the international conference scheduled to be held in Switzerland later this month. The writer says it is a fundamental point which all the Syrians should agree on, and then all other points are open to be debated. Any result that Geneva conference could come out with, other than agreeing on fighting terrorism in Syria, would be worthless. What is equally important is that the countries which sponsor the extremist thought of the terrorist groups must stop supplying these groups with weapons and hold the media and political mobilization in their favor. The writer adds they should also stop the instigation campaigns that aim to devastate the country and undermine Syria's resistant role in confronting Zionist and colonialist projects in the region that aim to perpetuate the Israeli occupation of the Arab territories. In their analysis, the editor believed the success of Geneva II demands that the international forces get to convince the extremist regional forces to stop the flow of weapons and money to the armed opposition groups, along with the political and media support. Almost 3 years from the crisis now, the certain thing today is that Syria's future is to be determined by the Syrians themselves throughout a Syrian-led political process free of any interference by the Western forces and regional countries. And in conclusion, the writer adds, the most important thing for the Syrian people is maintaining the Syrian state integrity and not creating a vacuum. At the conclusion of the scheduled dialogue, the polls decide the future of the country. And from the Daily News Egypt, Tony Badran writes an article where it looks at the possible rapprochement between Washington and Damascus. The article is titled, White House Sees a Partner in Assad. Starting from the Wall Street Journal, publishing a lengthy and damning chronicle of President Obama's handling of Syria, Badran considers that 2013 was a particularly catastrophic year for US policy in Syria, marking Washington's official abandonment of the Syrian opposition. In his opinion, it is worse than 2014, may well be the year the White House begins to process a re-engagement with President Bashar al-Assad. Badran looks at statements from US Ambassador Robert Ford, reportedly who told the Syrian opposition recently it shouldn't expect any quick outcome. Ford also is said to have informed the opposition that the US cannot offer guarantees that the Geneva talks would lead to Assad leaving office, nor is there any sense of when Assad would be required to leave. As a senior UN official commented, the time frame for Assad's departure is not clear. In the writer's analysis, the White House is clearly in no hurry to see Assad go. This has been obvious for a while. US officials leaked how they did not wish to see the rebels win outright and how Assad's departure at this time would lead to a jihadi takeover. The White House's focus in Syria is squarely on Sunni extremist groups. Syria is now viewed as a security problem, not one about ousting Bashar al-Assad and helping the Syrians get what they want. For now, Badran adds, the public US opposition still says that Assad cannot be part of an arrangement to keep the regime, but not President Assad and some of his closest aides. Some opposition sources have even claimed that Washington and Moscow were in agreement that Alawites would retain their dominant role in the army and security apparatuses. And to conclude, Badran believes the White House has deliberately eliminated alternative courses of action that would force Assad out. More importantly, it has conceptualized the Syrian conflict such that it does not see Assad and his regime as the central problem whose removal is the priority. The path the White House has consciously charted in Syria is a one-way street leading back to Assad. And now it's time to talk to an expert on Syria in Damascus base, Nidal Naisi. Thank you very much for joining us on the show today. Do you hear me?
Yes, thank you very much. Good afternoon to all.
Thank you. Good afternoon to you. Mr. Naisi, an article in the Daily Star newspaper mentions that various rebel groups, from the mainstream Free Syrian Army to the conservative Islamists of the Islamic Front, have found common cause in trying to stem the influence of Al-Qaeda in Syria. Do you agree with that?
Yes, first of all, no, I don't agree. I do think that this is a kind of naturalizing and marketing Al-Qaeda and international Islamism in Syria, supported by the West. First of all, let me correct and add a very important information that these armies and forces are not pure Syrian ones, but in fact they are full of strangers, mercenaries and Western security companies, as well as sleeping Al-Qaeda cells in the heart, who came from the heart of Western capitals, and we all heard about the French cell which has been arrested 2 days ago. I think this information are according to Western media reports and statistics. Moreover, there is no such moderate forces in Syria. All are the same. I think that Western media is marketing them as moderate so that to legalize their presence in Geneva too. In fact, this is not the question at all. The question is who is standing behind those and why. and who is and who is supporting them with money and with men, and and who is the international sponsor and who is supporting them. The game of nature or the game of nations is quite clear here. We are which is taking place in Syria. When we know the answers to these questions, there will be no need to ask ours. This is one on one respect. On the other respect, I do think that the attempts of these forces became useless to make any penetration on the front of the regime. The war is taking now a shape of a war of attrition rather than to be able to topple down the regime. The evidence is that no influential Western official is talking anymore about regime change or toppling down President Assad or Assad's departure as a precondition for Geneva II.
Yes.
I do think that this is a new wave of terrorism. What is happening in Syria, in fact, is terrorism as nothing but a terrorism. It's a new phase of war which will not influence the regime. The regime.
Yes.
The regime has in fact absorbed the shock and the first waves and moved from defense state to attack one.
Mr. Naisi, do you believe that Al-Qaeda's influence is actually increasing in Syria?
Yes, that's what we are having in Syria is Al-Qaeda. Nothing but Al-Qaeda and its mercenaries. 90% of the body of the warriors are from Al-Qaeda. We don't have Syrian fighters, pure Syrian fighters who are fighting the regimes. All are coming from abroad. And my information are from Western media and from Western reports, from Western statistics, not from mine. They are not from the regime. The Western media now is talking very openly and clearly about that. Al-Qaeda, you know that the Saudi influence on this this opposition and their full support of them. Saudis are talking openly about supporting them. Saudis are responsible for 9/11. All the West now have forgotten 9/11. Why? Why you are forgetting 9/11?
Yes.
9/11 have been perpetrated by 15 or 14 Saudis out of 19 who crashed the Twin Towers.
Yes, and Mr. Naisi, do you believe that Al-Qaeda will be able to threaten the regime in Syria?
No, at all. Syria has, in fact, a regional and international extension, a strategic extension. I am talking about Syria, real friend, not the Western friend of the opposition.
Right.
I mean Iran, China, Russia, and the BRICS group who are supporting Syria to the end, who will not at all allow the regime fall down.
Yes. Another question, Mr. Naisi. The Wall Street Journal published an article about President Obama's handling of his policy in Syria in 2013, which is seen by Tony Badran of Daily News Egypt as particularly catastrophic as in terms of U.S. foreign policy in Syria. Do you believe that the U.S. actually abandoned the Syrian opposition in 2013? And do you see any possible rapprochement with President Assad in this coming year?
Yes, in fact, this is what is happening. The United States is now re-engaging President Bashar al-Assad.
How do you think so, and why?
Many reports and many meetings of high security officials from the West who are visiting Syria to talk about fighting terrorism, and as well as we have now a kind of shattered, weak, divided opposition which can no more influence the regime or has any power to topple it down. The U.S. has realized that President Bashar al-Assad has a deep and wide popularity even among the so-called free zones, especially after the atrocities, horrors, and crimes committed by the mercenaries in Syria. which created in fact a popular mood to go back to the Syrian state, to the Syrian traditional state, and abandoning the so-called revolution, which proved to be a cover of an outside aggression and terrorism against Syria and the Syrian people. The U.S. realized that it is impossible to overcome the Syrian government army with its because the Syrian army, as I told you, has regional and international extensions outside, and with a full and determined support of Syria's real friends in Tehran, Moscow, and Beijing. The opposition itself is mainly Islamist. The Syrian people don't like this kind of regime to be an Islamist regime in Syria. It is shattered, divided, and rivaled with each other. Each faction has special and different agenda according to the sponsor. This is sponsored by Qatar, this is sponsored by Turkey, this is sponsored by Saudi, this is sponsored by French, this faction is sponsored by any other state, so that this fact has divided in fact the opposition, and it's impossible to unite it under one banner or one goal, or one goal. President Assad, on the other hand, showed in fact a great determination to fight Al-Qaeda terrorism in Syria, and he seems to be a symbol of national unity now in Syria. He is a symbol of national unity and national stability, and I think that the U.S. has realized that attacking Syria is a suicidal, catastrophic option which will ignite the whole region, including America's closest friend.
Yes, and Mr. Naisi,
for Americans to lose a shattered opposition is better than sacrificing friends and potential war on terror allies like Syria.
Yes, and do you believe, Mr. Naisi, based on the following, on whatever you have just stated, that the opposition is Al-Qaeda based and supported by the Wahhabis of Saudi Arabia and Qatar?
Yeah, that's right.
Based on that, who do you think, in your opinion, who would be legitimate opposition to go to Geneva 2? Apart from the opposition, who do you think should be going to Geneva 2?
Well, this is in fact the dilemma of the opposition or the process of Geneva now. With the regime team is ready to go to Geneva. We all know the Syrian government team who will go to Geneva, why they are going. But it's impossible now to find a unified front on the opposition front. They don't know why to go, who will go, why they are going, whom they are representing. Are they representing the Syrian people, or are they representing the interests of the sponsors, or the Western, or the regional or international sponsor? This is in fact the dilemma, to find a one unified, consistent and coherent team to go, or group to go to Geneva to stand in front of or opposed to the regime delegation.
Thank you.
Hello?
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was political expert Nidal Naisi on the line. Let's continue our coverage on the Middle East. As Turkish Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan says he will not oppose the retrial of hundreds of military officials convicted on coup plot charges, let's take a look at what analysts are saying about Erdogan in 2014. Sedat Ergin writes an opinion piece in Turkey's Hurriyet Daily News, taking a look at Turkey's relations with other countries in his article titled 2013, a year we do not want to recall in foreign policy. Erdogan says academia, who in the future will be drafting Turkey's foreign policy, will probably mark the year 2013 as an unfortunate era when several failures occurred one after the other, when all the assumptions that the policies were based on have totally collapsed, when the perception of the country in the world was altered, and when its regional gravity was upended. The writer adds that the most negative aspect in foreign policy is the fact that Turkey is at odds with most of the countries in its own geography, quarreling with almost everyone, yelling at and scolding all the actors that you are angry at in the international arena inevitably disrupts, moreover cancels out your ability to play a role and take initiative in international politics. Taking a look at Turkey's policy towards Syria, Erdogan says the biggest negative aspect in this picture is the lack of comprehension and far-sightedness and the mistakes in calculating in policies towards Syria. And another point the writer notes is that theories about Turkey being a role model in its region have been tested and failed. The main reason for this is that Turkey is distancing itself from the requirements of being a role model. The brutal police violence used at Taksim's Gezi Park has enhanced the image of an extremely polarized country. Erdogan says that perhaps one dimension of the problem also stems from decision maker number 1 and number 2 in foreign policy. The problem in Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan front is he has extremely personalized his relations with the outer world. Erdogan is directly reflecting his ideological stance as well as his feelings and anger to foreign policy, as he does in domestic policy without any restrictions. The writer concludes that in the end, Turkey has a profile at the beginning of 2014 of a country which cannot make use of its potential, which cannot contribute to regional or world peace, which is evaluated with the criteria of unpredictability within the international system, and one which demonstrates uncertainty with its fundamental perspectives and sense of direction. It would not be a mistake to say we have left behind one of the most unsuccessful years since the start of the Republic. Kadri Gershel writes for Al Monitor saying while 2013 was not a good year for Erdogan and his Justice and Development Party, the AKP, 2014 could be worse. In his article, 5 reasons 2014 could be a tough year for Erdogan. Gershel says last year was an annus horribilis for Turkey's Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan and his Justice and Development Party. Nothing went right for the ruling party. There is no reason to think that 2014 will be any better. Gershel says that the parameters of 2014 tell us what will not be happening, where he notes 5 factors that will make 2014 a tough year. The first is that the AKP versus Cemad Gulen movement and the struggle that exhibits features of civil war within the state, the worst losers so far have been the Prime Minister and his party. But Erdogan and his close quarters are preparing to retaliate and appear to be mobilized in a comprehensive way to eliminate the Cemad state power. This struggle will inevitably escalate in 2014. Both sides are delivering serious body blows to each other's legitimacy. The second factor is economy. Gershel says first the Gezi Park phenomenon, then the AKP-Cemad strife and the internal instability resulting from the damages this strife has inflicted on relevant institutions have made Turkey an unpredictable country. This negative factor, when combined with a global financial conjuncture, may well discourage money from coming to Turkey. Having problems finding credit, the negative repercussions will press harder on Turkey's economic growth. The third factor he notes is elections. Gershel believes that the AKP-Cemad struggle will definitely lose the AKP votes. Even more important, the corruption scandal that so far has resulted in the departures of 4 ministers who were all considered close to Erdogan has now become a part of the AKP image. Erdogan has no choice but to enter the local elections laden with corruption charges. The fourth factor is foreign policy and foreign relations. Gershel highlights last year was the year of the bankruptcy and exhaustion of the AKP foreign policy. What Ankara has to do is save itself from the regional and global isolation it has dragged itself into, to redesign, that is, to reformat its foreign policy on secularism, strong institutions and predictability. But the current foreign policy makers who caused this year's deficit of confidence and trustworthiness in Western and Middle Eastern capitals can't do this. even if they wanted to. The final factor, according to Gersel, is the Syrian crisis. Syria has become the black hole of Turkey. The best contribution Turkey can make for resolution to the 2014 crisis will be to refrain from damaging the political transition process. And Gersel concludes that to slow down his downslide when faced with this negative mix of 5 elements, Erdogan will be needing good luck more than ever. And Joseph Puder writes for Front Page Mag, taking a look at Prime Minister Erdogan's position in his article, The Diminishing Erdogan. Puder says Recep Tayyip Erdogan is in trouble and on a downward spiral. The graft scandal that gripped Turkey recently, which involved his government ministers, will have a significant impact on his continued leadership as the head of the AK party and his presidential aspirations, of course. Puder says that Erdogan is used to having his way in Turkey as a result of winning 3 consecutive national elections, and in the process he's undermined the Kemalist legacy of secularism. Together with the Gulen movement, he has managed to eviscerate the leading military brass, which has been the preserve of Turkey's secularism. Puder says that for President Obama, anchoring US policy in the region on Recep Tayyip Erdogan has been at best a bad gamble. There is little to show for the US investment. Erdogan's Turkey is clearly not a model of an Islamic democracy, as it is being unraveled politically and economically. The writer adds, internally, the Kurds and Alawis in Turkey will amount to more than half of the population, and although conservative in outlook, these minorities will not necessarily tie their future with Erdogan and his AK party. Puder says that Erdogan's AK party stands in the local parlance for pure, clean and unblemished. The graft scandal has shown it to be not so pious, certainly not so pure, and with many blemishes. Erdogan's leadership is now in question as never before, and the AK future is on the line depending on the outcome of the current political crisis. The writer concludes that municipal elections are scheduled for March 2014, and later in June, presidential elections will be held. The results are likely to foster change in Turkey. What is most unsettling for Erdogan, but good for the West, is an alliance between conservative secular elements and the Gülenists. This combination, after more than 10 years in power, might be able to oust the ever more diminishing and arrogant Erdogan. And now let's take a look at the top headlines from international papers. The Washington Post leads its front page with the headline, US will not send forces to aid Iraq. China's Global Times leads its front page with the headline, No Joint Command MOD as observers call for modernization of military structure. And Iran's Tehran Times leads its front page with the headline, Zarif discusses Syrian with Erdogan Davutoglu. And finally, the UAE's Gulf News leads its front page with the headline, Egypt-Qatar relations in a tajid spin. For more updates, visit us on levant.tv. That was all for today. We'll be with you tomorrow for another press review.